Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about copyright law and understanding the rules that you have to follow as a student. If you've never heard of copyright before, hopefully by the time we get to the end of the lesson, you will understand what it means and why it's important to you. So imagine that you just spent all of your time over the summer creating a brand new video game, and then you submitted it to a video game company and they loved your idea and decided to create it. Now imagine that your video game idea went live and suddenly someone started creating illegal copies of your game and distributing it and keeping the money for themselves. Now all of the plans that you had for the money that you were going to make are gone because someone else is taking credit for what you did and getting the money for what you created. That's just not fair. Because we want to make sure that we don't steal someone else's work and get credit for it, we're going to talk about copyright laws and what they mean to us. So what is copyright? First off, take a look at this symbol in the corner. You see that symbol on things that are copyrighted, but just because it doesn't have the symbol doesn't mean it's not necessarily copyrighted. So we need to be careful. So let's pay attention so we can understand which works are copyrighted and which ones aren't. The definition of copyright is the legal rights to an original work. So this can include, but is not limited to, the following kinds of work. Literary works like books, magazines, newspapers, musical works, including the music that is written, the lyrics that go with it, an accompaniment to musicals, those kinds of things. Dramatic work, including plays and musicals. Anytime dances are created, the choreographic works are copyrighted. Pictorial, graphic, and sculptural works, that includes photography, art, anything that is created by an artist is included in that. Motion pictures, which means movies, videos, TV shows, anything that you can watch, and other audiovisual works. And then sound recordings, so that can include audiobooks or music that you listen to, things like that. Just also FYI, all material on the internet is copyrighted unless otherwise stated. So sometimes there will be things that are royalty-free on the internet, and if you want to use images that are royalty-free, you need to specifically search for those kinds of images. So why do you, as an 8th grade student, need to understand copyright laws? First off, not following these laws can have varying consequences, depending on how drastically you violate them. So punishment can vary from $750 fines through higher fines, all the way up through possible 5-year prison sentences. Now, you're not going to get that as a student, but we want to prevent that kind of punishment when you are older, so we're learning these rules now when the stakes are low. You will also be using various forms of texts, visuals, audio, and videos through your school years and into your career, so it's better to learn them now so that you don't have to find out the hard way later on that you violated copyright in the middle of your dissertation or a presentation that you're giving for a promotion to a company. So how do you know if something is protected by a copyright law? So there are 3 things that have to be in place for you to know if it is protected by copyright. First off is originality, and all that means is it has to be a brand new work, meaning that you are not copying something off of someone else. It has to be original to whatever your topic is. So if you are creating a new song, then you need to be careful that your lyrics or your music are not too similar to someone else's. Otherwise, you're going to have to get permission to use their music. So sometimes you hear about lawsuits where musicians are being sued for using something that's very close to someone else's song, and they oftentimes lose the lawsuit and have to pay for using work that doesn't belong to them. The second one is creativity. There has to be something creative about the work. In fact, the Supreme Court says a modicum of creativity. So that just means you have to be showing that you are an artist creating something for it to be considered copyrightable. And then the last thing is fixation. And all that really means is that it has to be set in stone in some way. You didn't just talk about doing it. It wasn't something you thought about. It's something that you have either audio recorded, written down, drawn, created. It has to be fixed in some way. It has to be visually there or auditorially there in some way, shape, or form. So with that idea in mind, there are some ways that students can use things even if they are copyrighted. So let's talk about fair use. Fair use is when you are using something for educational purposes, but there are stipulations to that. There are certain things that you have to follow if you're using it under a fair use law. So first off, it needs to be a small portion, and it needs to be cited properly, and it needs to fall under these 4 criteria. First off, the purpose and character of it is non-profit, meaning you are not trying to create something out of somebody else's work and then going to sell it somewhere. You're not going to sell a book that you created, borrowing someone else's illustrations, things like that. The second one is that it has to be educational. You have to be using it to either show what you're learning or for it to be part of the learning process itself. Thirdly, the amount used or copied is very small compared to the whole thing. So if we were going to borrow something from a novel, maybe it's part of a chapter or a single chapter, but it came from a 23-chapter novel. So that would be considered small. But if it's a picture book, I can't take all 48 pages of it and say, it's only 48 pages, that's small. Well, that's the whole thing. So it has to be small as compared to the entire work. And then fourthly, you cannot affect the market potential. And all that means is you're not taking away money that could be earned by the artist by using this small portion of the work. So I'm not keeping an author from making money by using just a small portion of the chapter. You would still have to purchase the entire book in order to get the full effect of the book itself. So how do you get permission to use copyright materials? So if you do want to use something and it is copyrighted, you can write to either the artist themselves or to the company who owns their work, and you can ask for permission. You never know unless you ask. Sometimes they'll say yes, you can use this for free, and sometimes they'll say yes, you can use it, but you need to pay this small fee to be able to use this for whatever purpose you're using it. And depending on what you're using it for will depend on whether there will be a fee. I do know that, for instance, if you are making an audiobook for someone who is blind from like a novel that you have, then there's no fee charged because it's being given to that person because they need it in order to be able to hear the story. So there are lots of rules that fall under that. So how did we end up getting this, and what are the actual laws and acts? So first off, bonus points for anyone who actually knows who Sonny Bono is. But Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act in 1998 says that an author's works are protected for 70 years after his or her death. So that's not 70 years after it's created. That is, they have copyright through the end of their lives and then plus 70 years. If it is made by a company, like someone works for a company and it is considered part of their job to create it, that term will extend from 100 years of the creation of that work or 75 years from the first publication or distribution of that work. So if you published under a magazine, it would be 75 years from when that publication date came out, not necessarily from when you first wrote the article, but when it first appeared in the magazine or newspaper. Also, anything copyrighted prior to 1978 is protected for 28 years. Then you may have the copyright renewed. Once it's renewed, it follows the same rules that we talked about up at the top of the slide. So an example of this would be the Beatles. So in the early 1980s, the Beatles were working on music with Michael Jackson and were discussing the importance of having the copyrights to works that the copyrights were ending on. Michael Jackson listened to that advice, so when the Beatles' music copyright ended, he decided that he wanted to bid for it, and in fact, he outbid Paul McCartney, who was one of the Beatles, and so Michael Jackson then, from there, owned all the copyright to the Beatles' music. So the copyright was up after its allotted 28 years, and because the person who wanted to buy it the most didn't have quite as much money as the person who actually got it, the Beatles lost their copyright to their own music. So changing the format of a material, that just means that if I have like a text, like a novel, I cannot change that to, like I can't scan it and change it to a digital text and it be covered under copyright law. That is not covered. I can't read a book out loud and record myself and call that acceptable under copyright. That doesn't work either. So just changing the format of it does break copyright rules. So to evaluate your understanding of this, you will follow this rubric that has been given to you from your teacher. So notice all the components that need to be added into your assignment. Make sure you have all of the components for full credit. And if there's anything that you don't understand, please don't hesitate to ask. You can use the presentation that I just went through with you guys, or you can go into the district databases and add information to your infographic. And that is what we know about copyright laws.